Have you ever asked yourself these questions? Or have you ever inquired into how things appear, are given, or present themselves to us in lived experiences? If yes, you have just encountered phenomenology. Good day, everyone. I am Francis Sam Santanes, and I am going to elucidate the context of phenomenological research in this video presentation. A phenomenological study describes the meaning for several individuals of their lived experiences of a concept or a phenomenon. It focuses on describing what all participants have in common as they experience a phenomenon. The basic purpose of phenomenology is to reduce individual experiences with a phenomenon to a description of the universal essence. To this end, qualitative researchers identify a phenomenon. This human experience may be phenomena such as insomnia, being left out, or anger. The inquirer then collects data from persons who have experienced the phenomenon and develops a composite description of the essence of the experience for all of the individuals. This description consists of what they've experienced and how they experienced it. Beyond these procedures, phenomenology has a strong philosophical component to it. It draws heavily on the writings of the German mathematician Edmund Husserl. Edmund Husserl was the principal founder of phenomenology, and thus one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century. He has made important contributions to almost all areas of philosophy and disciplines such as linguistics, sociology, and cognitive psychology. Writers following in the footsteps of Husserl also seem to point to different philosophical arguments for the use of phenomenology today. Looking across all of these perspectives, however, we see that the philosophical assumptions rest on some common grounds. The study of the lived experiences of persons, the view that these experiences are conscious ones, and the development of descriptions of the essences of these experiences, not explanations or analysis. At a broader level, David Stewart and Algis Mikunas emphasize four philosophical perspectives in phenomenology. First, a return to the traditional tasks of philosophy. By the end of the 19th century, philosophy had become limited to exploring a world by empirical means, which was called scientism. The return to the traditional tasks of philosophy that existed before philosophy became enamored with empirical science is a return to the Greek conception of philosophy as a search for wisdom. Second, a philosophy without presuppositions. Phenomenology's approach is to suspend all judgments about what is real, the natural attitude, until they are founded on a more certain basis. This suspension is called epoche by Husserl. Third, the intentionality of consciousness. This idea is that consciousness is always directed toward an object. Reality of an object, then, is inextricably related to one's consciousness of it. Thus, reality, according to Husserl, is not divided into subjects and objects, but into the dual Cartesian nature of both subjects and objects as they appear in consciousness. And fourth, the refusal of the subject-object dichotomy. This theme flows naturally from the intentionality of consciousness. The reality of an object is only perceived within the meaning of the experience of an individual. An individual writing a phenomenology would be remiss to not include some discussion about the philosophical presuppositions of phenomenology, along with the methods in this form of inquiry. There are two types of phenomenology: hermeneutical phenomenology and empirical transcendental or psychological phenomenology. Max van Manen is an educator and has written The Hermeneutical Phenomenology, in which he describes research as oriented toward lived experiences, phenomenology, and interpreting the text of life, hermeneutics. Although Van Manen does not approach phenomenology with a set of rules or methods, he discusses phenomenology research as a dynamic interplay among six research activities. Researchers first turn to a phenomenon, an abiding concern, which seriously interests them. Example, reading, running, or driving. After, they write a description of the phenomenon, maintaining a strong relation to the topic of inquiry and balancing the parts of the writing to the whole. Phenomenology, according to Manin, is not only a description, but it is also seen as an interpretive process in which the researcher makes an interpretation of the meaning of the lived experiences. Karl Mostaka's transcendental and psychological phenomenology is focused less on the interpretations of the researcher and more on a description of the experiences of participants. In addition, Mustakas focuses on one of Husserl's concepts, epoche, as much as possible to take a fresh perspective toward the phenomenon under examination. Hence, transcendental means in which everything is perceived freshly as if for the first time. Mustaka's procedure for conducting phenomenological research was mostly followed because it has systematic steps in the data analysis procedure and guidelines for assembling the textual and structural descriptions. Textual description is what participants experienced, while structural description is how participants experienced it in terms of the conditions, situations, or context. The major procedural steps in the process would be as follows. First, the researcher determines if the research problem is best examined using a phenomenological approach. The type of problem best suited for this form of research is one in which it is important to understand several individuals' common or shared experiences of a phenomenon. It would be important to understand these common experiences in order to develop practices or policies or to develop a deeper understanding about the features of the phenomenon. Second, a phenomenon of interest to study is identified. Third, the researcher recognizes and specifies the broad philosophical assumptions of phenomenology. For example, one could write about the combination of objective reality and individual experiences. These lived experiences are furthermore conscious and directed toward an object. To fully describe how participants view the phenomenon, researchers must bracket out, as much as possible, their own experiences. Fourth, the data are collected from the individuals who have experienced the phenomenon. Often, data collection in phenomenological studies consists of in-depth interviews and multiple interviews with participants. Other forms of data may also be collected, such as observations, journals, art, poetry, music, and other forms of art. Fifth, apply phenomenological data analysis. Steps are generally similar at all psychological phenomenologists who discuss this method. Building on the data from the first and second research questions, data analysts go through the data and highlight significant statements, sentences, or quotes that provide an understanding of how the participants experienced the phenomenon. Mustakas calls this step horizontalization. After this, the researcher develops cluster meaning from these significant statements into themes. Sixth, write a description of what the participants experienced, textual, or description of the context of setting that influenced how the participants experienced the phenomenon, structural. Lastly, from the structural and textual descriptions, the researcher then writes a composite description that presents the essence of the phenomenon, called the essential invariant structure. One, phenomenology requires at least some understanding of the broader philosophical assumptions, and these should be identified by the researcher. Number 2. The participants in the study need to be carefully chosen to be the individuals who have all experienced the phenomenon in question, so that the researcher, in the end, can forge a common understanding. Finally, bracketing personal experiences may be difficult for the researcher to implement. An interpretive approach to phenomenology would signal this as an impossibility for the researcher to become separated from the text. Thus, the researcher needs to decide how and in what way his or her personal understandings will be introduced.